You're listening to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, created to help you succeed in your PMP certification journey. Learn more at baremetalcyber.com, where additional prepcasts, books, and training materials await. Let's get started. Change is not an exception in projects. It is the rule. Stakeholders learn new things, markets shift, risks emerge, and even the best initial plan cannot anticipate everything. What separates a professional project from a chaotic one is how those changes are managed. Unmanaged changes erode trust, break baselines, and create confusion about what is real. Managed changes, by contrast, preserve integrity by showing that every adjustment was analyzed, approved, and implemented predictably. The project manager's role is not to stop change, but to steward it. On the exam, when you see a VIP demanding a quick fix or a sponsor saying just do it, the lesson is clear. Change must pass through a defined path. The objective of change management is simple but powerful. Evaluate, approve, and implement in a predictable, visible way. This predictability builds credibility with sponsors and stakeholders. It demonstrates that the project manager is not blocking value but protecting it, ensuring scope, cost, schedule, and quality remain balanced even as the environment shifts. The stance of the project manager is neutral. You are not an advocate for every change, nor an enemy of flexibility. You are a gatekeeper of governance and value. On the exam, the correct answers are usually those that emphasize analysis before action, even under pressure. Where test stems probe this area, they often describe moments of stress. A high-ranking executive might push for immediate action. A team member might want to slip in a feature while they're already in the code. A regulator may impose a last-minute mandate. The PMI way is consistent. Capture, analyze, approve, and then implement. Skipping these steps breaks governance and leaves no traceable record. Exam distractors may try to tempt you with speed, but the correct answer usually stresses structure. Analyze before act is a mantra worth remembering. Once captured, every change is entered into the change log. This log becomes part of the project's configuration control system. It links each request to the elements it may affect: scope, schedule, cost, quality, risk, or even expected benefits. Without this record, requests are forgotten or handled inconsistently. The change log provides accountability. Stakeholders can see what has been requested, what is under review, and what has been decided. A triage step ensures completeness. Does the request have enough information to be analyzed? Exam stems that describe undocumented or forgotten requests usually point to the need for a visible change log. Triage is not analysis, it is preparation. The project manager ensures that the request has the minimum information required before analysis begins. For example, if a request says, quote, "add reporting," but offers no details, it may be returned to the requester for clarification. Triage prevents wasted time analyzing vague or incomplete requests. It also reinforces the governance principle that change is a process, not a conversation. On the exam, correct answers emphasize triage for completeness, not diving into full impact analysis before the request is even clear. Impact analysis is the heart of change management. Here, the project manager and team analyze how the proposed change would affect scope, schedule, cost, quality, risk, and benefits. Compliance considerations are also reviewed, since many changes are triggered by regulatory requirements. The goal is to present a balanced picture. If we accept this change, what will it mean? If we defer it, what is the risk? If we split it, what are the trade-offs? On the exam, answers that skip analysis and rush to action are wrong. PMI's stance is clear. Always analyze before act. Impact analysis must be grounded in artifacts. Artifacts are the official records of the project: baselines, backlogs, contracts, test strategies, and risk registers. These documents provide the evidence needed to understand consequences. For example, analyzing a scope change means Checking the scope baseline or backlog. Evaluating a resource shift means consulting the schedule and cost baselines. Contracts may also constrain what can be changed. By consulting artifacts, the project manager ensures that analysis is not just opinion but fact-based. On the exam, the correct answers emphasize consulting baselines and artifacts, not improvising from memory. Options must be generated during analysis. Not every change must be accepted or rejected outright. Sometimes a change can be deferred until resources free up. Sometimes it can be split into smaller increments. Sometimes the best action is to reject it with rationale. Each option must be documented, along with assumptions. This structured presentation gives decision-makers clarity. On the exam, stems that describe a sponsor asking, "What are my options?" are signals that the project manager must present impact analysis, not simply say yes or no. Decisions and approvals follow analysis. The path depends on governance. Some changes require review by a Change Control Board or CCB, especially if they affect baselines. Smaller changes may fall within delegated thresholds, allowing the project manager or sponsor to approve directly. In agile environments, policies may define how backlog changes are handled without a formal CCB. The principle is the same. Match the request to the correct approval path, then record the decision. On the exam, correct answers emphasize respecting the defined governance route, not improvising or escalating without process. The presentation of options must be clear. Decision-makers should see not only the requested change, but also its impacts, trade-offs, and assumptions. The project manager may recommend the best fit, but the ultimate decision rests with the authority defined by governance. Recording the decision is as important as making it. Who approved, when, and under what conditions must all be logged. This protects the project from disputes later. On the exam, look for answers that emphasize recording decisions with rationale, not simply announcing them verbally. Communication after decision is where many projects fail. Once a change has been approved or rejected, all affected stakeholders must be informed. This includes the requester, the team, and any external partners. Without communication, the project risks working to old assumptions. PMI emphasizes that communication is part of change control, not an afterthought. On the exam, correct answers often involve ensuring decisions are communicated to the right people, not just to the requester. Implementation begins once approval is secured. Artifacts must be updated baselines in predictive projects, backlogs in agile projects, and logs in all projects. Plans, schedules, and cost forecasts must reflect the new reality. Execution of the change must be monitored to ensure the intended outcome is achieved. Secondary risks may arise. For example, adding scope might increase workload for testing. These must be managed proactively. On the exam, the correct answer emphasizes updating artifacts and verifying outcomes, not just telling the team to start work. As implementation unfolds, responsibilities must be assigned clearly. Who will execute the change, when it takes effect, and how results will be verified must all be stated. A clean audit trail is essential. Every step of intake, analysis, decision, and implementation must be traceable. This creates accountability and protects trust. On the exam, distractors often describe vague or undocumented changes. The correct answer emphasizes keeping the audit trail clean and complete. In summary, Part 1 of this chapter showed that managing changes is about structure, neutrality, and transparency. Change requests are captured and logged visibly, triaged for completeness, analyzed against all constraints, and presented with options. Decisions follow governance paths, are recorded with rationale, and are communicated to all stakeholders. Approved changes are implemented with updates to artifacts and clear responsibilities, while audit trails preserve accountability. On the exam, the mantra holds, "Always analyze before act." This discipline distinguishes professional change management from chaotic improvisation. For more cyber-related content and books, please check out cyberauthor.me. Also, there are other prepcasts on cybersecurity and more at baremetalcyber.com. Updating baselines is one of the most sensitive steps in managing change. A baseline is the approved plan against which performance is measured. PMI emphasizes that baselines should never shift casually. They are updated only after a change has been analyzed, approved, and documented. Configuration control practices preserve the version history, showing what changed, when, and why. Without this discipline, baselines lose meaning, and stakeholders cannot trust reports. On the exam, when asked about scope or schedule updates, the correct answer usually includes waiting for approval before altering the baseline. The principle repeats: analyze before act, and update only after the decision is formalized. When baselines are updated, they must be synchronized. A scope change affects the schedule and often the budget. Updating only one baseline creates contradictions. PMI stresses that integration is part of change management. Scope, schedule, and cost baselines must remain aligned. Reporting integrity depends on this synchronization. For example, moving a milestone in the schedule without adjusting cost forecasts creates false confidence. The exam often tests this principle with scenarios where only one part of the plan is updated. Correct answers emphasize alignment across all subplans and protection of the data date, which is the reference point for measuring progress. Configuration control is the discipline that keeps the project's plan trustworthy over time. Every approved change is logged, baselines are versioned, and an audit trail shows approvals and rationale. This prevents disputes about whether a change was legitimate and helps future projects learn from the record. Protecting data date integrity is part of this. Progress is measured against a consistent time reference, not shifted arbitrarily. On the exam, stems describing confusion about which version of the plan is real are testing whether you understand configuration control. The correct answer always emphasizes version discipline and alignment. Agile projects handle changes differently, but the principles are the same. In Agile, the product backlog is the scope repository. Changes are introduced through backlog refinement, guided by policies agreed upon by the team and stakeholders. The sprint, once committed, is generally protected. Changes go into the backlog for future sprints, preserving the team's cadence. Predictive projects rely on formal change requests, approvals, and change control boards. Hybrid environments blend the two, allowing backlog changes while still respecting stage gate approvals or regulatory checkpoints. On the exam, the key is to apply the right policy for the context, not to force predictive controls onto Agile teams or vice versa. Documenting tailoring and exceptions is part of good change governance. If a hybrid project allows minor backlog changes without CCB approval, this exception should be documented. Otherwise, stakeholders may perceive inconsistency or favoritism. PMI stresses that tailoring is legitimate but must be transparent. On the exam, distractors often show project managers skipping process for convenience. The correct answer emphasizes tailoring with rationale, not shortcuts without documentation. Policies should be clear so that all stakeholders know how changes will be handled in their delivery mode. Emergencies are a special category. Every project must define what constitutes an emergency and who has the authority to act. For example, a hotfix may be needed to protect customer data or meet a regulatory mandate. In these cases, speed is essential, but even here, PMI stresses discipline. Implement the emergency change safely, then follow up with retrospective analysis and formalization through the normal change process. On the exam, stems describing emergencies test whether you recognize the need for both rapid action and later governance. The correct answer balances urgency with documentation. Emergency paths must not become normalized. If every change is treated as urgent, the project loses governance discipline. PMI warns against overusing emergency authority because it undermines the predictability of the process. True emergencies are rare and should be reserved for situations where compliance, safety, or major business value is at risk. On the exam, distractors often suggest bypassing governance for speed. The correct answers stress that emergency exceptions are predefined, documented, and used sparingly. Afterward, the team must reflect on the emergency and consider whether new preventive processes could reduce the need for future exceptions. Communication is particularly critical in emergencies. Stakeholders must be informed quickly about what is happening and why. At the same time, documentation must not be abandoned. Even if only partial notes are taken in the moment, a complete record must be created afterward. This protects accountability and prevents confusion. On the exam, scenarios describing emergency changes often require answers that combine rapid communication with later documentation. PMI's message is consistent. Urgency does not eliminate the need for traceability. Let's apply this thinking in a scenario. Imagine a regulator mandates a new requirement while testing is already underway, and the deadline is approaching fast. Options include implementing the change immediately without documentation, suspending testing and raising a formal change request with rapid impact analysis, requesting a waiver from the regulator, or ignoring the requirement until the next release. The best action is to raise the change request quickly, analyze impacts, and implement per policy, updating baselines afterward and informing all stakeholders. On the exam, the wrong answers are usually those that act first without analysis or governance. In an agile variant of the same scenario, the team might apply an expedite policy. A compliance-related user story could be moved to the top of the backlog and delivered in the next sprint, with notes added for audit purposes. Even here, the principle holds: analyze before act, implement per policy, and document the rationale. On the exam, clues like regulatory or compliance always signal that skipping documentation is incorrect. The correct answer balances urgent delivery with traceable evidence. Exam pitfalls in change management are highly predictable. One is updating baselines before approval. Another is accepting or implementing changes without analyzing their impact. A third is treating reserves as slack to cover changes informally. A fourth is bypassing communication, leaving stakeholders unaware of decisions. PMI stresses that each of these behaviors undermines governance and trust. On the exam, distractors may tempt you with speed or appeasement. The correct answers consistently emphasize analysis, approvals, and communication before implementation. Another pitfall is confusing gold plating with managed change. Adding extra features without approval, even if they seem beneficial, is scope creep. PMI emphasizes that every change must be requested, analyzed, and approved, not slipped in as extra value. On the exam, stems describing team members adding work while they're in the system usually test this point. The correct answer is to stop gold plating and route all work through the change process. Communication failures also show up frequently. If only the requester is informed of a decision, others may continue working with old assumptions. PMI stresses that communication must be broad, including all stakeholders affected by the change. This ensures alignment and prevents wasted effort. On the exam, correct answers emphasize documenting and communicating decisions, not assuming word of mouth is enough. A quick playbook can summarize disciplined change management. Step 1. Log every request in a visible change log. Step 2. Analyze impacts across scope, schedule, cost, quality, risk, and benefits. Step 3. Seek approval through the proper governance path, whether CCB, delegated authority, or backlog policy. Step 4. Implement the change, updating all artifacts and managing secondary risks. Step 5. Communicate decisions and preserve the audit trail. Reserve emergency paths only for true exceptions, always followed by retrospective and documentation. On the exam, answers aligned with this playbook echo PMI's philosophy: analyze before act, communicate broadly, and protect cadence and integrity. In conclusion, managing project changes is not about blocking flexibility, but about protecting value and governance. Baselines are updated only after approval. Policies differ across agile and predictive contexts, but always emphasize transparency. Emergencies are defined and controlled, and communication is constant. Exam pitfalls are shortcuts acting before analyzing, rebaselining prematurely, or skipping documentation. The correct answers consistently stress discipline. Capture, analyze, approve, implement, and communicate. By following this structured process, project managers transform change from a source of chaos into a controlled path for sustaining value delivery. Thanks for tuning in to the Bare Metal Cyber Prepcast, your trusted source for cybersecurity news and insights. Remember to subscribe at baremetalcyber.com so you never miss an update. And visit cyberauthor.me for best-selling cybersecurity books that equip you with expert knowledge. Until next time, stay secure and stay vigilant.